As we pick up on our fourth lesson here in Matthew chapter 6, the last chapter, chapter 5, the Lord had started what we call the Sermon on the Mount. And as He starts the Sermon on the Mount, and I grieve that we were not able to do the entire Sermon on the Mount in one package, because the whole thing fits together. And when we start trying to separate it someplace and divide it up, we end up doing it like an IRS code book, where we pull a passage and we use it for our own purposes, and it's not fitting in the context of what Jesus is using that message for. And what has happened in chapter 5, and we only covered chapter 5 last week, Jesus has just selected His 12 apostles. He's way on down the road. Matthew doesn't tell us anything about the Judean ministry because he wasn't there. He was up collecting taxes up outside Capernaum at the Sea of Tiberias, that part of the Sea of Galilee they call the Bay Area, called the Sea of Tiberias. Well, there's many things that we have not heard about in Matthew that Mark, Luke, and John tell us about. Specifically Luke, because Luke's account of the gospel was to be in specific, direct order. Well, Matthew is not in direct order. And in fact, chapter 12 of Matthew, when we get to chapter 12 of Matthew, actually has already happened before the Sermon on the Mount. It's out of order. It's put in the wrong place in Matthew's recollection. Because Matthew is really going through and putting things in a little bit of an order, but really he's tying things together that are important for Jews to know. We don't know anything about the Samaritan woman at the well. Matthew doesn't cover that at all. That is not needed for a Jew to believe in the Lord. In fact, a Samaritan to a Jew is an unclean person. Therefore, Matthew does not include in his gospel that story that has already transpired prior to chapter 5 in our lesson. Lots of things have happened. Lots of ministry has happened. We don't hear about the turning the water into wine. We don't hear about the healed man, the official who comes from Capernaum and says to Jesus, if you could come heal my son, and Jesus says, go on, your son is healed. We don't hear about any of those things going on in Matthew, because those are things to do with Gentiles up north, and things to do with Samaritans who are half-breeds. Matthew is concerned with presenting the gospel that teaches and tells a Jewish person that Jesus is the King of the Jews, that He is the King of Kings. And so Matthew is not specifically in order. Well, Matthew doesn't even cover the fact that Jesus has just appointed the 12 as the apostles. With all this crowd of over 5,000 plus people who are there, Matthew doesn't cover that. That's not important to the Jews for their faith that Jesus is the King of the Jews. He just puts in what's needed. So he goes to this Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus has got these 12 apostles, and He's talking to these 12, but He's also talking to the multitude. And so the Sermon on the Mount is for all the believers who hear what Jesus is saying. So that means it's for us too. Jesus has laid out this paradox that we call the Beatitudes. And it really is a paradox that those who are poor in spirit shall inherit the kingdom of heaven. And there are often times where many of us are poor in spirit at different times. And this paradox that we have this blessing that even though something is going wrong in our life, we know on the other hand that heaven is our throne and heaven is our place where we're going to be our home. Those who mourn or at the same time have this unbelievable comfort in our lives. It's the paradox of what following the Lord is going to be like. And so we're really supposed to take those Beatitudes and put them together in a package to show us that the Lord is trying to say, you follow me, things will be a struggle and things will be tough. But on the other hand, you know that in the end we win. In the end there's a blessing. In the end there's this wonderful reward for you. And so the whole Sermon on the Mount is about rewards, about right rewards and about wrong rewards, and where your rewards are and where your treasures are, whether they're in heaven or whether they're on earth. Jesus then says, after he does the Beatitude, he talks about the law and the prophets. And he is very plain. I love the way the King James says it. It doesn't say that in the same way in the NIV. In the King James it says, not one jot or tittle of the Old Testament, Old Mosaic law will be done away with. Everything, every bit of it has to be fulfilled, and Jesus has come to fill them up. He has come to bring them into fulfillment. Now, many of us, we like to think that we're New Testament church, and so Old Testament doesn't have anything to do with it. But folks, the more you study, especially those of you who have now we've been through the New Testament, and we're finishing the New Testament now of all the books of the New Testament with the book of Matthew. It's funny, it's the first book, but it's our last one we're doing. Those of you who started with me 4 years ago, how many times, I don't think we could even count on our hands how many times I have said to you, there's nothing new in the New Testament. All the kernels of thought in the New Testament come out of the Old Testament. Even the book of Revelation, almost every alliteration, every symbol, everything that is there in the book of Revelation can be found over in the Old Testament. All the way from the creatures, with the face of a lion, the face of a bear, the face of a man, the face of an eagle, all the way down to everything. Everything is there. Now, it may be packaged in a new little twist, like it's being laid out by the seals or by the trumps or by the bowls, the seals being the acts of man, the trumps being the acts of Satan, and the bowls being the acts of God. And so there's three perspectives that are being laid out, but all of that is found over in the Old Testament. No, not the trumps, not the seals, not the bowls, but the things that happen inside of each of those, as each one of those is open, is all in the Old Testament. And so even with the book of John, the book of Mark, the book of Luke, all this history is Old Testament history, Old Testament material that's bring forward. So Jesus says, not one jot or tittle will be done away with, and then he starts to give examples of it. He says, those of you have heard, you shall not murder, or you shall not kill. Thou shalt not kill. And Jesus says, I'm going to tell you something. The act of killing is a sin. But if you even think about killing someone, that's as much of a sin. So what's happening is Jesus, think about it in the form of maybe, we always talk about the glass. So let me draw a glass. That's a pretty bad glass, isn't it? About the glass being half full. This part down here is the Old Testament law, and the Lord comes and fulfills it or fills it up by saying, okay, the Old Testament law is the acts of doing things, like of killing, but with Jesus, he's filling it up, and the rest of this up here, which is he's adding to in the New Testament, says even the thought is a sin. Hope that's the way you spell it. I think it is. Yes, it is. Okay, even the thought. So he fills that up. Now, let's go on back. Going on, he talks about adultery. And he says in adultery in the Old Testament was punishable by death. But he says, but I'm going to fill it up in the New Testament. Even the thought of adultery is also a sin. Adultery is a sin here in the Old Testament. It's a sin, and the act of adultery is a sin. And even the thought of adultery is a sin. You follow me? We go to divorce. He covers the divorce thing. He basically shows us that there is absolutely no reason for divorce. And in the Old Testament, divorce is really a sin. In the New Testament, just even the thought of divorce gets spread out and gets filled up, that divorce leads to other things. And it's a sin. And so he goes through these and some other things. And he's tying them all together of the things we do on earth. We don't want to do these things in our thinking process. So for the Lord, the heart and the mind is as important as the Old Testament acts that they were required not to do. You see, in the Old Testament had a road that was a broad road path, and the Jews would come in and they had all these things they had to do on the way down the path towards eternity. But in the New Testament, what Jesus is doing, He's doing this to the road. He's funneling it all in. Now He's saying, okay, this was broad. If you do the act, you do the act, and the act is wrong, it's a sin. You do this act, it's wrong. You do this act, it's wrong. You do this act, it's wrong. Over here, Jesus is making it much nearer and saying, okay, this act is wrong, this act is wrong, this act is wrong, this act is wrong. But looky here, even if you think about it, it's wrong also. So He's bringing this in, and He's making all the Old Testament law much more stringent. But it's a paradox. It's an incredible paradox. Just like in the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes, if you mourn, you still got that comfort there as a believer. In the New Testament, even though He's making it more stringent, it's actually easier. Over here you had to go, okay, I've got this sin, I got to go get this dove, I got to go have it done, I got to get this ram, they got to cut it in half, I've got to make this offering, I got to make this offering becomes a sacrifice. Broad is this way, but over here, it's just the thought in the heart. It's much easier this way, even though it's much more narrow. So it's an interesting paradox. So what happens is, the Lord has dealt with all of this already in chapter 5 about making things more stringent for us. We have to understand it's what's inside that counts as much as what we do on the outside. And then He comes on and says, beware, verse 1, chapter 6, beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. The Pharisees practiced their righteousness in front of everyone. And in fact, in the Pharisee life, there were 3 things that you did as a Pharisee to show your righteousness towards all the people who were out and around you. One was in the way that you gave alms to people. Number 2 was in the way that you prayed. And number 3 was in the way that you showed and did your fasting. 3 things. It was a 3-pronged way to show your righteousness as a Pharisee, and you had to show all 3 things. And it didn't matter what you felt like inside, it was just part of the ritual of the things that you did. Now, these 3 things are not new in the New Testament. They were old in the Old Testament. Let me just pull one of the stories. It's not in your notes. I wish it was. I wish I'd put it in, but it's not in your notes. It's a perfect example, and there are several of these. If you remember, Ahab looked out his window. He was the king of Israel, and he looked out his window one day, and he's an evil king. He is not a good king. He looks out his window one day, and he sees this vineyard, and he wants this vineyard to be his own. And he tells his wife Jezebel about this vineyard and how he wants it, and how he's gone to try to buy the vineyard, but the owner of the vineyard will not sell to him. He's grieved. He's king. Actually, he could have taken it if he wanted to, but even as a bad king, he's not going to take the vineyard. Well, Jezebel makes a plan. She goes to the religious leaders, the Pharisees of the Sanhedrin, all that going on already, and she says to them, listen, we need to work a little project here. And what I want you to do is I want you to call a called fast. And as you make this called fast, when the people come into town, we're going to find some people who, when we give them alms and gifts and food, and we will offer our prayers for them, we will convince them that they need to testify against the owner of this land, of this vineyard, so we can judge him to be a crook or whatever and put him to death. So the religious leaders called fast. Now, in those days, anytime you did a called fast, it didn't matter whether you were Jew or Gentile or whoever, everybody in the country, every poor person, everybody came to the city because the people of the city, the Jews, were giving out gifts of alms. They were giving prayers for these people, and they were, in their fasting, giving up their food to give it to the people. It was a way of gathering a crowd, and we see it several times in the Old Testament. So sure enough, they come in and they're giving alms, and they say, hey, we got this deal going on here. We need to have a court thing, and we need some witnesses, and we just gave you this food. In fact, we'll give you some more if you will come over here and you will testify against the owner of this property of the vineyard. That's what they do. They put the guy to death. Jezebel takes the property. She comes to her husband Ahab, and she gives it to him. And Ahab, even though he is a horrible king, he is an ungodly king, He is grieved because of the way that Jezebel has gone about the process of getting that land for him. And of course, you know what the prophecy comes along after that. The prophets come in and tell her that that the dogs will lick up her body, and in fact she does. She falls out the window, I believe is what happens, and dies, and the dogs come and devour, and the only thing that's left is the palms of her hand and the soles of her feet. That's what happens to Jezebel because of this sinful, evil act of trumping up and bringing people in to this religious activity of almsgiving, prayers, and fasting that is never instructed in the Old Testament anywhere to do. And in fact, let's just look at something. All right, for those of us who have actually done some work in the dating and the times of everything in the Bible and run everything back from known dates that we have according to lots of internal information, Adam was created at about 4179 BC. And all the way from there until the first 5 books of the Old Testament are completed. They are completed just before the children of Israel leave the wilderness and go into the promised land, and that happens in 1405 BC. So, for how many years is that? 20, what would that be? 4, 7, 4 from, how long is that? 20 what? 2774. For 2,774 years, there is absolutely nothing in the first 5 books of the Old Testament under the Mosaic Law and all that, nothing about fasting. Nothing about public prayers. Nothing really and truly about almsgiving. These things they've brought up. Oh, let's go on someplace else. When you get in the New Testament to the book of Romans, so you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You've got the Acts. So you've got the first 5 books of the New Testament. You get to the book of Romans, and from Romans through Revelation that deal with the church, there is absolutely nothing in those books about fasting. Not one thing. Not one single thing. It seems to me like if fasting was important, it would be in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It seems to me that covers 2,747 years. You follow me? It seems to me like if fasting was important, it would be in the instructions to the church somewhere. Seems like it would be there. But there's nothing. Not one thing. Even at the tail end of the book of Acts, Paul is on the ship. They're fixing to be shipwrecked. These sailors who worship other gods have been fasting because that's what they do in their false religion. And Paul says to them, boys, you got to eat. You haven't eaten for 14 days. You've been fasting and trying to work and all that according to your God for 14 days. You need to take some food. People, food's made for the body. The body's made for food. You need to eat. If you will eat, we will get through this safely. And they do. And they get through it safely. Of course, then they start trying to jump off the ship, and Paul goes, oh, not at this point in time. Anybody leaves the ship, they're going to die. And they keeps on going. Finally, he says, now it's time for us to get off. And they're following Paul's lead. So we're dealing with all this stuff. Now, where did this fasting thing come from? Fasting came out of Egypt. Because in Egypt, they worshiped the god Ra. They worshiped the god On. They worshiped the god Tut. Okay. Who are these gods? Different gods. Gods to different things. You've got Ra Moses. We also call him Ramesses, meaning drawn from the god Ra. We've got Ah Moses, whose daughter Nefertiti was the one who pulled Moses out of the river, out of the bulrushes. Ah Moses was drawn from the god On. We've got Tut Moses. Tut Moses was the third, was actually the Pharaoh that Moses went and saw. We have his, and you've seen him, you've been in my lessons with me. We've got all of these mummies. We know what their faces look like. We can see those faces that Moses looked into and lived with and was half brothers with. We got all those mummies. We know what they look like. They drawn from the god Tut, which was a different god of the false religions that were in Egypt. Whenever the children of Israel left Egypt, it took 40 years to get them from Egypt into the promised land, get them out of Egypt, and they never got all the stuff they learned in Egypt out of them. In fact, what happens back in Egypt, Joseph starts right off the bat. Joseph is the second in command. He's the viceroy. He's the one that under the Pharaoh that he is under takes control of almost all of the known property of the world, because people have come to him, according to the Genesis passage, and he had stored up all this food for 7 years, and when they didn't have money any longer to buy food, he started taking cattle for trade for food, and when they didn't have any cattle to give anymore, he started taking their land for food, and finally he controlled almost all of Egypt. And that Pharaoh is known for the Pharaoh that united all the northern Egypt and southern Egypt. There was the white king of Pharaoh, and there was the red king of Pharaoh, if you remember that. And they have different headdresses. I can't draw the headdresses. Let's see here. And then one comes up and goes down like this. And so when you see the white and red together, now you see the headdress looks something like this now, and you know that means it's the United Kingdom of the upper Egyptian kingdom and the lower Egyptian kingdom. By the way, the lower Egyptian kingdom is actually higher north than the upper Egyptian kingdom. It's because it has to do with the direction of the land, not with the direction of north or south. Whenever all this happens, Joseph has Jacob, when he dies, his father, embalmed like a Pharaoh. And that meant 30 days of fasting during the time it took to prepare the body of the Pharaoh, which actually took 70 days to prepare it. They prepared Joseph that way. Then Joseph ends up taking him back and burying with his grandfather Abraham, his father Isaac, and Sarah, the grandmother, who's buried over back in Israel, and Joseph comes back. By the way, during this time, there is no formal religion of the Israelites while they're in Egypt. There's no formal going and doing Jewish type things in clean animals and unclean animals. That's not happening at this point in time. In fact, the head of every patriarchal group, every family unit, was the priest of that group, just like we saw with Abraham, just like we saw with Isaac, just like we see with Jacob, just like we see with Job, just like we see with, I was thinking of another one. Just a minute, but just slipped my mind. Anyway, that's what happened. Whoever the head of the family was, the oldest male in the family, acted as the religious leader, whether he was a good man, a righteous man or not, and led his people in worship on the Sabbath. Now, they knew to do it on the Sabbath, and they'd lead in worship, but there was no formal religion until they come into the wilderness, and in 1443 BC, they have been in the wilderness for 2 years, and finally, Moses has the instructions from the Lord on the temple, on the tabernacle, and on the Ten Commandments, and on the Levitical law. That is all that we have already by 1443. They left Egypt in 1445. That's the first formal worship. They brought with them, not the religious leaders, but the people brought with them this stuff out of Egypt. Every false religion in the world includes fasting as part of its mandatory religious acts. And the Pharisees, by the time of Jesus' day, had mandatory times of fasting. And in fact, already prior to the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has gone to the house of Matthew, who writes this gospel. Matthew has followed Jesus. He's accepted Jesus as the Savior. He has invited all of his tax collector friends, and they've gone to his house on a Thursday, and they've invited all of Jesus' followers to come to Matthew's house, and they're there having a party on Thursday, and the mandatory fast days in Jewish life were Mondays and Thursdays. The religious leaders show up to Matthew's house and question Jesus and say, Jesus, why are your followers not following the Jewish rules and fasting on today, the mandatory fast day? And Jesus brings this little thing up and says, look, if you're having a wedding on Thursday, remember this is your Jewish teaching here. If you have a wedding on Thursday As long as the guests of the wedding are with the bridegroom, they don't have to do that fasting law on Thursday or Monday if the wedding's going to be on Monday. They're exempt from it on that day. He says, I tell you this, as long as my followers are with the bridegroom, they do not have to fast. And Jesus' specific 12 did not fast anytime. But he's talking to this whole group of Jews who are out there in this multitude on the Sermon on the Mount. And he's having to deal with this, and so that's what he's saying. He's going to say, don't do what the Pharisees require you to do of the hypocritical giving, of the hypocritical praying, and of the hypocritical fasting. So he goes on to say, verse 2, boy, that was a long intro, wasn't it? So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogue and in the streets, so that they may be honored by men. So you come up, I give you a little thing, I give you da-da-da-da, imperial margarine. Da-da-da-da, crown. See what I did? Did you see it? I just gave this poor people some money. Yeah. Sin, folks. Sin. Sin. Look here, it goes on to say, truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. They're not laying up for themselves treasures in heaven by giving someone something and then saying, look what I did. Did you see it? Their treasure is here on earth. He's filling the glass. In the Old Testament, Pharisee actions, it was the act that was important for righteousness. But Jesus is saying, no, it's the heart and it's the thought, and that you do it secret. He goes on to say, but when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That is impossible. That is an impossible paradox. Your left hand is going to know what your right hand is doing. So what he's saying to you is do it as if you don't. Do it quietly. Do it secretly. So that your giving will be in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. In other words, where's the place of your rewards? You do things from the heart. You do things from the way you think inside. Not from the way you do the actions outside. For all these years that I've been doing my ministry, I have probably got a file cabinet full of thank yous from the people that we have done things for. But you will never see me pull out those thank you notes and flaunt them before anybody. Because if I rely on the thank you notes, I'll get so focused on the thank you that I'll do things for the wrong reason. And you don't hear me talking about what we've done for anybody. Even if it is a big deal, we don't talk about that. Now, if you who we did for wants to tell everybody in the world, that's your business. In fact, Jesus is going to cover that a little later. All those things that are done for the Lord with the right heart, if they will spout out and they will be known by all. And if the people don't tell it, who it's been done to, the rocks will cry it out. You got it? So you just do it in secret. You do it quietly. You don't need to know from me all the times that we do things. We've got this gal who is in our office. Her name is Kathleen. She's getting a psychology degree, and she's doing a course, a private study course in our office. And if you've called in the last 3 weeks, you've talked to her. Her name is Kathleen. And the whole course is in my office, and she has to record everything that happens. And she's needed to be in some type of social services. And I, of course, gave her the drill. I said, we're not really social services. But if your professor will let you be in here and do your journaling and everything, I think he will be quite surprised of what happens inside of a church. And so she has been answering the phone. We've taught her how to do that. She answers the phone. She takes down all the information. She listens to all the story. She comes and she asks us how we're supposed to handle it. I tell her the information, or Sally does, or somebody does, and she goes back and she answers the questions. And it's incredible. She's got a document already about this thick of what her daily log is. And as she's presented it to her professor is just blown away at all the different social problem situations. When I say that, the problems in the society that come through the office of Helping Hands. It is an incredible picture that she's being able to be aware of the vastness of the types of things that people have to be ready to look at. But not one of those things we flaunted about. We don't want anybody to know, look what we did. It doesn't matter what we did, because if it matters what we did, that's building up treasures here on earth, not treasures in heaven. Now the problem is I get paid for doing it, so it doesn't count for me anyway. You got that? It doesn't count at all. I've got to go outside of my job and do things that count for in heaven, because that's what I'm required to do. I get a wage for it. Now we're going to study that too. We're going to get to that where Jesus says, if you're paid a fair wage, that's it. That's your reward. That's what you get. So all that thing you want to thank you for this and thank you for that, that's what I get paid for. Now don't take that wrong, folks, okay? My heart's right in it. But really, I've gotten my reward. I pay my light bills with what I do. You understand? Just like when you work, it's my job. You have your job. And what you get your reward for what you do at Center Point or Reliant or wherever, out at the Intercontinental Airport, whatever you do. That's where you get your reward here on earth. There is nothing in my bank up in heaven for the things that I do while I'm on the job. At least I don't think so. I'm hoping there's a big stack, but I don't think so. You got that? So I have to go outside of that. But what we do, look here, when you pray, you are not to be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray and stand in the synagogue and on the street corners, so they may be seen by men. Listen, at prayer time, 5 times a day, at the appropriate prayer time, when the ram's call hits, wherever these religious leaders were, they got down on their knees, they faced Jerusalem, they went up and down, and they prayed their ritual recital prayers. Same thing every time. When Muhammad didn't make it as a Jew, formed Islam, the Islamic folks bowed down 5 times a day, just like the Jews, and prayed to Jerusalem until Muhammad finally got Mecca under his control, and then he changed it so they now pray to Mecca instead of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem is still the second holiest city in Islamic faith. If they can't pray towards Mecca ever, they'll pray back towards Jerusalem, because they think that belongs to them. It doesn't. Psalms 24. It doesn't. It's the Lord's. It belongs to the Lord, not to them. But they would bow and pray on the street corners. Lord, we pray and we thank you that we are not like Gentiles. Don't be offended with the next part, ladies. And we're not like a woman. We're not women. And we're not like these tax collectors, the publicans. It was all part of their ritual prayer. They said over and over and over again. 5 times a day. Didn't matter where you were, everything stopped for their ritual prayer of their righteousness. But truly, truly, I say to you, they have their reward full. This is nothing invested into heaven. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you're praying, do not use meaningless repetitions as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. So don't be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. Okay, since I'm just offending everybody, let me just offend some more. I go to do a funeral. Funeral's great. We do the funeral, and next thing that happens, it's a part Baptist funeral, it's a part Catholic funeral. And out comes the beads. Hail Mary, full of grace, blessed art thou among women, blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Oh my. And you do that one time, and then here it comes again, flip another bead. And then here it comes again, Hail Mary, full of grace, flip it again. Repetition. Oh, ritual. Over and over and over. Jesus says, don't pray like that. That's like the hypocrites. Don't pray like that. It's just a modern time example. And you have to sit there while they do 50 of them or 100. It seems like 1,000 of them. And you think, okay, here we go again. When is that bead thing going to be over with? Repetition. Don't pray like this. Pray like this. Our Father who's in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The last part of that we all pray is not in the oldest and most reliable documents that we have. We have from 400 AD or before. It was added in after 400 AD. He says, for if you forgive others for their transgressions, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, then your Father will not forgive your transgressions. You're to pray with gratitude. You're to pray and ask Him for guidance. You're asking Him to keep you out of the evil situations. You're to pray to ask Him to help you with choices. You're to honor Him and give glory to Him. You're to forgive others. And when you go to pray, you need to forgive those who've done something wrong against you so He will forgive you. Every one of you in this room, I don't care what age you are, at some point in time in your life, every day, you have to forgive somebody unless you're a hermit. And if you're watching TV, you got to forgive them on TV. You can't get away from it because somebody's made you mad. Hadn't made you mad, just turn on Fox Radio. It'll make you mad. If what they're talking about make you mad, the way they're talking about it will make you mad. You follow me? We have to make sure that we forgive others who've sinned against us so that the Lord will forgive us. Whenever you fast, do not put on He's talking to everybody here, got it? Whenever you fast, don't put on that gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance, so that they will be noticed by men and that they are fasting. Truly, truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full, just like the other things here. But you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that your fasting will not be noticed by men, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. In other words, on those required, you Jews, because He's talking to all Jews, on those required Mondays and Thursdays that are fast days, don't look like you're fasting. Spruce yourself up. Make yourself smell good. Comb your hair. Brush your teeth. Clean clothes. Don't do it like the ungodly Pharisees who are doing it all for show. Oh, yeah, I'm giving to others. I'm fasting. I'm about to die here. Jesus is in the wilderness for 40 days with the Lord, and He's doing great. And then He becomes hungry. And when He becomes hungry, what happens? The devil comes to tempt Him. Jesus is saying, don't be like the hypocrites who are acting like they're hungry because they've given their food to the people, other people. Don't do that. Don't fast like the hypocrites. Don't pray like the hypocrites. Do not give alms like the hypocrites. Don't do it for show. Do what you do for the Lord, for what's in your heart. Do it because what you do in your heart is laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven, not here on earth. Verse 19, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroy and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Don't do it for public display. Don't do any of that stuff the Pharisees are telling you to do. Hang on, because when we get to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, which I hope we get to in just a few minutes, and we're going to try to get there, He's going to say, it's over. You're not going to follow the Pharisee stuff anymore. Don't do things here on earth, because what you do here on earth, this is your reward. If you do it for show, there's nothing in heaven for you on this. It's not chalked up in any way. Verse 22, the eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? The eye is the portal of the world into your soul. And I will tell you this, the blind man is often more blessed than you are. Because every turn, those of us who can see turns, our eyes see things that we should not see. And the problem is we don't see it and look the other direction. Too many of us see it and look back and stare. And we let it go into the deepness of our soul, and it is sickness and it's darkness. My wife, we've been married now almost 31 years. She has the uncanny ability to look into somebody's eyes and she'll say, they're not healthy, they're sick. And she'll say, they're not doing well. They're not doing well at all. And 2 weeks later, we'll be doing a funeral. And I'm going, Kay, how'd you know? You could see it in their eyes. You could see the glow or the dullness in the eyes that they're sick. The yellow, the whatever that's going on. And she just knows. I never look at that. But the eye is the portal into life, of not only your physical life, but also your spiritual life, and you can see it. You go back and look at some of the pictures that y'all have of people that you've had, and you'll look in their eyes in those pictures and you go, you know, I didn't notice it before, but there's something wrong in those eyes. And then you look back in history and you think, yeah, there was, because of all the unhappiness and the crud that was going in their life that we didn't know when we got the picture. But it shows in your eyes, and you cannot hide it. If you've got darkness in your soul, your eyes will show it. If you're treasuring up things on earth, here through your eyes, into your soul, on earth and not in heaven, your eyes will show it. So don't worry. Don't worry about, you got a problem. No one can serve two masters, he says. No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. Now this is all still in context. It's all still about what you see with your eyes. It's all still about where you treasure. Read on. For this reason I say to you, do not be worried about your life, as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body, as to what you will put on. Oh, I've got to have this brand. Remember how teenagers are? Got to have the right brand or the right jeans. They got to fit. You know, they got these jeans out now. I learned this yesterday because we went shopping. They got these jeans that are made to be slimming. They call them slimming jeans at the very bottom. And these jeans are about this big up here, and they go down to these little points down at the bottom. Have y'all know what I'm talking about? And I'm looking at those going, you know, we used to try to hide the top. And now we're accentuating the top by making the bottom so everybody you see walking down the mall looks like this. Even if they're little bitty people, they look like this. I'm going, this does not make sense. But the kids would not be caught dead in bell bottoms anymore or boot cut. No, Daddy, I can't wear boot cut. What would my friends say? Well, darling, if we can't find either skinny on the bottom, big enough to put over your legs, you're going to have to get something different. Daddy, get away. I'll choose my own. You want to be grounded? No, I like exactly what we're buying. Of course, I did have to buy the 3-inch heels, too, at the same time. Give and take. And they had to be the right brand. It does not make any sense to me where you can go get the shoes we wore in the 1960s. They're called Vans or something like that. You know what I'm talking about? We all had them, except ours did not come checkerboarded. We did that with our own pins. You know what I'm talking about? The deck shoes. And you can buy them at one place and they're $49.95, or you can go over to the other place where they're not $18.95 and they look exactly the same. They just don't have the tag on it. Don't worry about what you're going to wear, he says. Don't worry about that. That's all rewards here on earth. That's not rewards in heaven. Oh, let's go on. This is my favorite passage in the whole entire Bible. Don't worry about you're going to put it on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, for they do not sow, nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet our Heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth more than they? And who are you by being worried can add a single hour to your life? Don't raise your hand, but some of y'all worry more about tomorrow than you do about today. And or next week, you got a list, and you end up copying your list every day of the list that you copied that you didn't done yesterday, something you get it done, so you can worry about doing something tomorrow because you don't have time today to do it, so you're going to do it tomorrow, but you really got time to do today's list if you just do today's list, but you're not going to do just today's list because you're worried about coming tomorrow and you don't get anything done. And who are you by being worried about a single hour to your life? And why are you worried about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil and they do not spin. Yet I say to you that not even Solomon in all of his glory himself was clothed himself like one of these. But if God so clothe the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more clothe you? You of little faith. Do not worry then, saying, what will I eat? Or what will I drink? Or what am I going to wear? My paraphrase. For the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things. For your Heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. And then we're back to these treasures in heaven. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Don't do the righteousness of the Pharisee. Do these things. So do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. How am I going to pay this tomorrow? Don't worry about it today. Worry about today's stuff. Is it due today? Worry about it today. Don't worry about tomorrow. God does not promise you tomorrow anyway. Shoot, you may be out of here tonight. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what tomorrow. Then he says, judge. Don't judge. Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the same way that you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, a log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. There's the hypocrite thing coming up again. You hypocrite, take the log out of your own eye first, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eyes. The Pharisees were masters at prejudging other people. Prejudging. I see what you're doing, and this is what you need to do. In fact, later on, Jesus is going to say, you Pharisees, you do these 5 things, and you teach these people these 5 things that they're not supposed to do, but you do every one of them in secret. You break every one of your own religious laws and religious teaching in secret. You do all this stuff, and it's wrong. They're doing it for religious purposes, to be seen. Don't judge people to be seen. Don't judge others to be seen. Don't lay out for yourself treasures of how you've helped others with a speck in their eyes. Don't throw the things that are holy to God, to dogs. To dogs. Don't throw things to dogs. In fact, the great way, folks, every one of y'all need to have a dog. I'm telling you why. You need a dog, you need to have it in your house. Because if a Muslim comes to your house to buy your house, he's going to say, has a dog ever lived in this house? When you say yes, they're gone. They're not going to buy that house. If everybody in Texas had dogs, we wouldn't have any Muslims in Texas. Now, you can have cats all you want, but you can't have dogs. And I know this for a fact because I had a house and I was trying to sell it. The Muslims came to buy it and they said, you had any dogs in this house? I said, not that I know of. I mean, we've owned the house for 3 years while we were taking care of our aunt. So we didn't have any dogs in this house. And sure enough, he's snooping around. He finds a little dog door over behind I didn't even know the dog door was there. It was around the corner on the other side of the little glass wall by the washing machine. And there must have been a little bitty dog. Couldn't buy the house. Had a dog in it. Had a dog door. Dog had been in the house. Don't cast the things that are holy before. Don't cast your pearls before swine, is what he's saying here, or they will trample them under feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Just the swine. You could take gems and pearls and throw them out in the corn, and the swine will come eat the corn, and they'll eat those pearls too. And in the like same manner, the Pharisees, if you cast these things out before these Pharisees, they'll swallow it up, not even knowing what it is. We had a hiccup this past week in which a pastor made a decision to do something. It got put on the internet, and it got all the way across the world. When he showed up on TV, he made a mistake. He cast his pearl before swine because he got on the TV and he said, if we do this and this happens, then we know it was God's will for us to do this. And he kept saying God's will. The world does not care about God's will. The world does not care about the supernatural intervention of God in anything. So when he gets off of his announcement, the whole world in TV says, that's a lunatic pastor. You got it? Had he just got out there and said, we've made an agreement, we're going to postpone, we're not going to do, and we're going to have a meeting, and that had been it. The world said, something's going on here. Something's going on here. We got problems in our prison systems, folks. We got problems. Picked up a man who was out of prison for 12 years, and we were talking. He said, Jim, the prison systems belong to the Muslims in Texas. In Texas, any religious group, Baptist, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, whatever, when they have a religious meeting, guards have to be present, but not with Muslims. Muslims, they go in, they can shut the door behind it. And he said, I went to some of those meetings, and they're nothing but a clandestine meeting about how they're going to terrorize and how they're going to pass on their terrorist movement. You see, the problem is whenever we as Baptists and we as Christians see things, we form a seminar or a program, and we're going to go in and train them. When they have a problem, they fight for their rights and get a lawyer. And that's where our problem is. And what happened last week on Friday and Saturday is we're trying to train the world. While the rest of the Muslim world is burning our flags and burning our effigies and claiming they're going to come down and kill us, We can't go burn one of their books, which, by the way, is the way to dispose of a Bible or any book that is tattered and torn, just like it is our flags in honor. Anywhere in the world, you burn it so that it's not trampled on or whatever. But we can't do it. So they fought for their rights, and all he was doing was fighting his rights, but he cast his pearl before swine of the supernatural ability of God. He goes on to say, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Or what man is there among you who when his son asks for a loaf will give him a stone? Or when he asks for a fish will not give him a snake, will he? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give what is good to those who ask Him? In everything, therefore, treat people the same way that you want them to treat you. For this is the law and the prophets. Now we're right back at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. He's summing this thing up. Right back to the law of the prophets. Right back to if Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as the lilies of the valley and the fields, and God prepares and takes care of all of them, how much more God knows what you need, and if you ask, and He will provide for you. Therefore, treat everybody like you want them to treat you, because that's the law and the prophets. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Enter through the narrow gate. Verse 13. You see what the Lord is doing? He's filling it full. He's bringing fulfillment to all the Old Testament stuff. And He's narrowing the gate now. Narrow is the gate. For the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction. And there are many who enter through it. For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life. And there are few who find it. But much been said about this narrow gate, and I didn't go into that. What I wanted to say is Jesus is saying to those followers of the Jewish followers who are there around Him, the old Mosaic law was broad, and now in fulfilling and filling it up, every jot and tittle, Jesus is saying, now I'm narrowing it down so that it'll be narrow. It won't be a broad way any longer. It's going to be a narrow way. And you will know who you're following by whether they're true prophets or not. Verse 15, beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then, you will know them by their fruits. This leadership package that's leading all the Old Testament stuff, and it's all acts and all laying down treasures here on earth, are not leading you truthfully, He is saying. And you'll know them by what they ask you to do and how they treat and how they live behind the scenes. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter it. You'll know these false prophets. These TV folks, TV preachers. I know of one personally, my best friend, the best man at my wedding. He was a Baptist. He was the same theology I have, but he was a musician too. And one of those TV evangelists from back in the 70s and 80s hired him, paid him mega bucks to play every one of the TV programs behind him, all this music, and play the worship services at his church, and to play went places with him and played with him. He never believed a single thing this man said because he saw this man of how this false teacher, false godly man, of how he lived behind the scenes. But on TV he'd go, oh, put your hand up on the TV. I can feel it in my soul. Oh, Jesus. And he'd do all this stuff. And he'd say all this stuff and speak in tongues and all this. And he'd have people say, God wants you right now to sow a seed. And he was a crook, and he went to jail for it. And now he's out and back on TV. I see it and want to throw up. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of the Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, I cast out demons in your name. Prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, perform mighty miracles in your name. Lord, just somebody. The Lord is calling somebody who's gotten a great gift to give that entire gift to the Lord. I know it's Christmas time and Christmas bonuses just came out, but you just came into this gift automatically. If you as normal people will listen to the rationale of what they're saying and look at how they're saying it, you will know their fruits and whether they're good or not. And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to wise men who built their house on the rock. That house. And the rains fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against the house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rains fell, the floods came, the winds blew and slammed against the house, and it fell, and great was its fall. When Jesus had finished these words, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority, not as their scribes, their Pharisees, their leaders. The Lord wanted his apostles and the followers there in that multitude from all over Galilee, Judea, Decapolis, Jerusalem, on the other side of the Jordan, to know that there was a new mission, there was a new plan, there was a new Lord, there was a new authority. And the Pharisees will not control religion any longer, and faith any longer, and spiritual lives any longer, because everything they are doing is for show. And all that old Mosaic system, the Lord is going to fulfill it and fill it up and bring it down to a narrow road. To those who put their trust in Jesus Christ will see eternal life and how we'll have great treasures in heaven. Our time is up. Father, we thank you so much for this great sermon that you gave, or your Son gave, there on the mountain outside of Capernaum, to let us know that our lives are to be lived as Christians different from all other religions, all other faiths. That we do live in a paradox, that we are not terrorists. We are not to live in fear. And even when troubles and struggles come, we know we win on the other end. We know that heaven is our home, and that we here on earth should build up quietly and secretly those treasures in heaven for the things we do and how we treat people. Not as the Pharisees of that day, but as the Lord did in that day. In your Son's name, amen.